Hi, this is part 2 of the introduction to TXV, which is the visual engine in the TX Modular system. Before starting, I've opened up the TX file that I saved in part 1. I've also opened the TXV app. One thing to point out is that it can take quite a few seconds to open TXV files, especially complex ones, because they tend to be quite large. This is because visual modules often have many more parameters compared to sound modules. Once everything's open, I'll first rebuild the TXV system that I made in the first video. So I'll open TXV System 1 and click the button Rebuild TXV System. This connects to TXV and sends all the information to it. So now we have the kaleidoscope image from before, and I'm going to add some layers to it. I'll create a simple picture of a wind turbine, and then I'll add some LFO modulation to animate it. So back to the TXV system. On the TXV Modules tab, I'll click on Draw Sources, and I'll add 2 copies of TXV Shape 2D. Then I'll click on Draw Destinations and I'll add 2 copies of TXV Transform. Just to explain a bit, draw destination modules are modules that can be drawn onto by many other modules using draw connections. Each draw destination has 20 layers and they modify those layers in some way. Then they draw them again somewhere else, either onto a new draw destination, which might modify them again, or to the main TXV system window. A bit later I'll demonstrate how the transform modules work. Basically they can rotate, scale and move whatever is drawn onto them before drawing them somewhere else. So back to the wind turbine, I'm going to focus on the first shape for now. This is going to be the central pole which holds the blades of the wind turbine. First I need to add a draw connection so we can see shape 1. I'll click on Draw Connections, select TXV Shape 2D1 and TXV System 1 on layer 2 and add it. We can now see a small green circle in the middle of the image. So now I'll edit TXV Shape 2D1. I'll change the shape to rectangle and I'll set the width and height. Then I'll change the fill color to light grey. And then I'll set the outline color to use fill color for line color, so it's all the same color now. Finally, we need to move the rectangle downwards, so I'll click on the Draw tab and select the Position, Anchor, Rotate tab, and I'll change position Y to move it down. The second shape is going to give us the wind turbine blades. I'm going to use 2 copies of the shape, and this is where the transform modules will be needed. In order for the 2 blades to be animated, I'm going to draw them onto a transform module. Then I can modulate the transform module with an LFO to rotate the blades. So now I'll add 2 more draw connections. The first is from TXV Shape 2D2 to Transform 1 on layer 1. The second is from TXV Transform 1 to TXV System 1 on layer 3. Again we see a green circle in the middle of the screen, this time in front of the grey rectangle, because we're on layer 3, so that's in front of all the other layers. To create the blade shape, I'll edit TXV Shape 2D2. I'll change the shape to ellipse. That's an oval shape and I can set the width and height to make a long blade. I'll change the fill color to very light grey. And I'll set the outline color to use fill color for line color, again so the color's all the same. Now we have our first blade. I'll add a second copy and I'll rotate it 90 degrees. So now I'll add two more draw connections. The first is from TXV shape 2D2 to TXV transform 2 on layer 2. The second draw connection is from TXV transform 2 to TXV transform 1 on layer 2. We can't yet see this second copy of the blade because it's being drawn directly over the first copy. In order to rotate it, I'll edit TXV transform 2, click on rotate and set rotate Z to 90 degrees. Now we can see the second copy of the blade. Finally, I'm going to add modulation to animate both blades together. If I open TXV System 1 and look at the Draw Connections tab, we can see all the draw connections in the order that I added them. Let's have a look at these. In Draw Connection 3, shape 2D2 is connected to Transform 1 Layer 1. That's the first copy of the shape. That's the first blade. In Draw Connection 5, shape 2D2 is connected to Transform 2 Layer 2. Transform 2 rotates the second copy by 90 degrees. In Draw Connection 6, Transform 2 is then connected to Transform 1. Since both copies end up on Transform 1, this allows us to rotate both blades together by rotating Transform 1. So if I open Transform 1, click on the Rotate tab, and move the slider Rotate Z, then we can see both blades are rotating together. So we are using Transform 1 to make a group from both copies of the blade and then rotating the whole group as if it was one object. So now I can add modulation to Rotate Z. At this point I should say that modulation works slightly differently in TXV compared to the main TX Modular system. In TXV modules, you have to turn on modulation individually for each parameter if you need it. So in this case, for modulation Z, I'm going to turn modulation mix to full on. And I'll change the rotate Z minimum value to 0. So the rotation range is 0 to 360 degrees, which is one full circle. With modulation mixed on full, nothing now happens when I move the Rotate Z slider, because only modulation can change the value. If I had set modulation mix to halfway, then the slider and any modulation signal would both be contributing equally to the rotation. Anyway, now I need to add an LFO module to modulate the rotation. So I'll go back to TXV System, and on the TXV Modules tab, I'll click on the Modulation Sources button and I'll add TXV LFO. TXV is like having another modular system inside the TX Modular. It has its own modulation sources, but you're also free to use regular TX modules to modulate TXV modules. In order to connect the LFO to Rotate Transform 1, we need to add a new modulation node. I'll click on the Modulation Nodes button. Again, this is different to the main TX modular system, where you'd add a channel to set up modulation, but it does do the same thing. Basically, it's connecting the two modules together. Here I can select TXV LFO1 as the source module, and out as the source name. Below that, I set TXV Transform 1 as the destination module and Rotate Z as the destination name. Now I can add the node, and you can see the blades moving much too fast. Also, you can see the node has been added in the box below. So now I'll change the LFO settings to slow it down a bit. First, I'll click on the BPM Cycle Phase button. Inside TXV, many modulation sources use a time measure that's based on beats. This allows you to set a master BPM in the TXV system module, and any modulation sources will then have the option of following the master BPM. By default, this is on, and the system BPM is 120 by default. So to slow the LFO down, I'm going to change the cycle time from 1 to much longer. 64 is good. Then I'll go back to the main tab, and I'll change LFO type to saw. That's a smooth upwards ramp. This gives the impression of continuous rotation. One thing to point out is that if I open node 1, I can change the modulation to negative modulation, and now the rotation will be anti-clockwise. I'll turn that back off for now. Finally, I'm going to add another type of modulation. This time I'll open up TXV Color Controls 1. And on the Color Adjust tab, I'll set Hue Shift Modulation Mix to be full on. And I'll also turn on Use External Modulation. External modulation allows the modulation to come instead of from TXV to come from the main TX Modular system. We set this up using a channel. So first I'll click on the source button and I'll add a TX LFO, which is an ordinary LFO. Now I'll go to channel 1 and connect LFO 1 to TXV Color Controls 1. And then I'll select Hue Shift as the destination. And now turn up the channel level. Now we can see the hue shift working. I'll lower the LFO frequency. And I'll also set the waveform to triangle. So that's the end of this second video covering the basics of using TXV. If you want to learn more, there are 6 example files for TXV that come with the TX Modular download. Each example has a help file to go with it, and they cover many more topics than I've shown here, including working in 3D. There are also lots more modules inside TXV for you to explore. I hope this introduction has given you enough knowledge to get you started. Have fun and bye for now.